In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abductions. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. Arthur C. Clarke.
The Abracast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
All right, welcome to Abracast. I'm John Towers. The prose anthology that I'm going to be in is coming up fast. I actually got to preview the artwork a little bit for the cover. It's pretty fly looking. It's called David J. Fairhead Presents Fiends of the Flesh. It's being put out by Burning Bulb Publishing. So keep your eye out for that. I promise I'm going to have some new comics coming out real soon. So look out for that. And just a reminder, I usually save this for the end of the show, but I just want to put up front here real quick. I'm not shilling underpants or fucking snack boxes and shit to you guys. Trying to keep it real a little bit. If you want to support the show, a great thing to do would be to pick up some comic books. Chances are, if you like the kind of weird shit that I'm talking about, you're going to dig the comics anyways. If you don't have any scratch, another great way to support the show is just to share it with your other weirdo friends. So there's that. You can check those things off the list there. Tonight, we're gonna get a little bit weirder than that. A little bit spacier. See, I remember when I was a kid, I was spending the night over at my grandparents' house, and they were watching In Search Of. If you guys don't know, In Search Of, you don't know what In Search Of is, it's Spock from the original old school Star Trek TV show, also hosted a show called In Search Of, where it'd be like in search of, Bigfoot, or in search of, they did one on like everything, like the pyramid, like the secrets of the pyramids, or Atlantis, or like whatever. And I guess that's kind of like where I got in the idea of liking like this weirdo stuff anyways. But I remember watching In Search Of, and they did one called Alien Captives. Nowadays we call them abductions. And I watched it, and they did like 2 cases. They had like this one guy, I think he had to like fuck a alien with red arms or something. And then there was this family that got abducted. And it really freaked me out as a kid. I won't even hazard to guess how old I was. Probably like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 or maybe 10. But I remember just going to bed that night and just feeling totally helpless. Like, if there's these guys that can just walk through the walls and scoop me up, or just shoot a tractor beam through the window and like fucking take me, like what defense do we have against such advanced technology? And they're sinister. They're always like jamming stuff up your butts. Your butt. I mean, you don't have more than one if you're normal. But they're always like probing you and like getting tissue samples and like jerking you off and stuff. And I just remember just feeling like helpless, and it was inevitable. It was going to wind up happening to me, and I was really, really freaked out about it. And so yeah, like I guess I just kind of always sort of carried this thing with me. And so this is going to be like part 2 or part 3 of like our UFO series or whatever. We did a UFO episode with Dan Foytik earlier in the show, and then we did one about alien abductions with a real drunk buddy of mine named David. So if you're interested in some background or whatever, I don't even know how scientific or well researched those were. It's kind of before the show figured out what it was going to be. So this is like, part 3 of our like UFO episodes. So what I want you to do, my friends, is besides sign up for my newsletter, and besides share the show with your other weird friends, and besides buy comic books, and besides enjoying yourself while you're listening to this podcast episode, I want you to pour yourself a giant gin jihad and watch your back. Because tonight we're gonna get abducted. I'm gonna tell you all about the Alagash Abduction. This is probably like one of the top 5 like most famous abductions, but this is the one that I don't see a lot of people talking about or whatever, so that's why I chose this one. We'll do one on the Benny and the Barney Hills, and we'll do one on the Travis Waltons and all that stuff in due time, my friends. But I wanted to just make sure that we get to talk about this one, and we'll get snatched out of our canoes and and have some aliens jerk us off. So yeah, so let's get into this. All right now. So, John, what is an alien abduction? In case you've been living under a rock or not tied into pop culture at all. An alien abduction, or abduction phenomenon as it's been called, describes subjective, real memories of being taken secretly against one's will and apparently by non-human entities and subjected to complex physical and psychological procedures, also called close encounters of the fourth kind. The people that have these experiences are called abductees or experiencers. Now, there's a fine line to be drawn here. Abductees is what you call them if they're not having a good time, and experiencers are what you call them if they are having a good time. So, yeah. So there's some kind of telltale sort of components to this phenomenon, and usually they fit usually most of these can find a place into an abduction story. Probably rarely all of them do. But so they're the capture section of the story, the exam and procedure section of the story, the conference. Now, this conference section is usually what will make or break or figure out if you're on an abductee side or if you're on an experiencer side. Because when they have the conference part after your medical exams, if you're an experiencer, this is the part where they take you and they're like, look, you humans are fucking crazy with all these nuclear weapons that you have, and, you know, we kind of have to, like, get you guys to realize that you're destroying our environment, okay? And, you know, you should really be vegans, and, you know, you're a hateful, destructive race of creatures in this backwater planet of the galaxy, and that's dangerous, okay? Now, the other, that's an experiencer. You know, if they have like one of these new age, like the day the earth stood still kind of vibe to them. The abductees, you hardly ever get any explanation. They're like, you're fucked and you're not, and bing, you're not allowed to move anywhere. Like, you're just stuck while I'm ramming this sink snake up your ass. It's more like being treated like cattle. So this conference thing is real. In the tour thing is the next. That's the one where they're like, hey, you want to see the other part of the ship? Like, we'll show you around. And this is like the star system and stuff that we come from. Loss of time is a big one. That's probably universal as far as, like, the first abduction case that I know of is the Benny and Barney Hill thing. And that was a part of that even way back then. Then the return, that's when they shove your ass back in the canoe. Theophany, which is when this I'm sure I guess is like an experiencer thing, is like when you have like a deep loving feeling, or you're like, you have like a high from it. Like, it's like equated to Stockholm syndrome, I would imagine. Like, God, those aliens were so dreamy with their spandex uniforms and their big bulbous heads. And then the other part is the aftermath, which is where you have to come to terms physically and psychologically with what you have experienced during this phenomena. So we're going to touch a couple of these in here, and the aftermath is actually pretty significant part of the story here. So where are we going to go? This is 1979. Doobie-doo. Hold on, I'm not sure that date's right. Okay. So somewhere in the past. All right, no, 1979. This guy named Jim Weiner, and I'm also drawn to this story because there's 4 human beings involved in this story, and all 4 of them are artists, and they all, like I said, like I kind of hinted about when I was doing the aftermath thing, they all kind of have their art kind of changed after this thing that happened to them. So I find it super fascinating. So, all right, let me get back into this real quick. We ain't got time for all those fucking around. 1979. There's a guy named Jim Weiner. I don't know if he's related to Carlos Danger. I'm going to say no. He was in an accident and developed an epileptic condition with a side of brain damage. So what happened was he was helping some guy do something to this house that he was buying or he just bought. And he opened up the door where the steps to the basement were going to go. But what he didn't know is that the steps to the basement were gone. So he basically stepped off into like an elevator shaft. And he tumbled down and he landed in a, you know, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's fighting with and the flying wing is behind him and he's fighting the big bald Nazi and the Nazi punches him and he falls down like right on his ass bone. That's what this guy did. That's what Jim Wiener did. He tumbled down like 2 stories and landed in a sitting position, like right on his ass bone. And so it broke his tailbone, and it's like if you were to give someone a pile driver for real, like a tombstone pile driver, or just a regular pile driver, and you like just compacted his spine up into his brain case, like that happened to this guy too. Not a pile. Like, it would really be funny, though, if he fell down the shaft thing where the steps were supposed to be, and he landed on his tailbone, and all of a sudden the Undertaker came out and fucking spiked this guy on the ground head first, but that's not how it happened. Just the collision of him hitting jammed his spine into his into his skull. So he had like a little bit of he had some brain damage too. So with these injuries, he developed epilepsy. We have seizures? Yeah. So when this guy would seize up, he would start having these visions, and then he also suffered nightmares for a long time. He would dream of these big black eyes, painful medical procedures, and he would dream about these 3 other dudes that he went on vacation with. And he remembered the vacation. The vacation took place in 1976 in Maine. They were doing a 17-day wilderness excursion. He remembers the vacation. He went with his twin brother, Jack. So there's Jim Wiener, Jack Wiener, and his neighbor, Charles Foltz. In my notes here, I just call him Foltz because the other guy's name was also Charles Rack. So these guys were all artists of some capacity, which I find fascinating. And they all decided they were going to go out for like almost 20 days out in the woods of Maine. There's this thing called the Alagash River or Alagash Lake system. So I don't know a whole lot about a lake system, but it looks an awful lot like a river. But all the spots that they talk about in this story are like named lakes and brooks and stuff. So I don't know. That's just what I don't know. Like, that's just what it is. Okay, so these 4 guys, they were all in Boston, and they drove up to Maine, and they took a single engine bush plane out to where they were going to start their journey. And the bush plane was so small, they can only take 2 of them at a time. So they had 2 canoes, 4 guys, 2 canoes. So each trip would be like 2 guys in their canoe and their like supplies and stuff. So they'd go out to the wilderness on the Alagash River in Maine. So the guys piled in their canoes, and they spent an awful lot of time when they're telling these stories. They spend a brutal amount of time talking about the headwind that they had on their first few days, like pushing against, like trying to canoe against this headwind. So then they made it like halfway up to where they wanted to be with their campsite on the first night. So they went and they found some other people and they were like, hey, can we just camp with you guys? You know, we didn't make it to where we were supposed to go. And, you know, they have like designated camp areas through these things. It's actually, Henry David Thoreau actually has one named after him because it's where he stayed when he was checking out America, which is pretty cool. So they let him. But they were like, yeah, hey, by the way, did you see like 2 other dudes? Like, we had 2 guys and they stopped to like explore this island or something. And, you know, it's getting dark and we don't know where they are. And they're like, yeah, we saw them. We actually passed them. And they got their binoculars out to look for these lads. And as they're doing that, off in the distance above what they call Eagle Lake, they saw this weird light in the sky. It was a yellow-white sphere, and after like 30 seconds, like it winked out. But Jim was looking at it through his field glasses, so he was able to like see it. He was like, man, that was weird. But since they were like doing like this missing persons thing, he didn't think too much about it. He was like, helicopter or flare, whatever, yada yada. I mean, whatever they had. So they all did whatever they were doing while they're camping, and they went to bed. The second day, they actually went out to Eagle Lake because they wanted to do some trout fishing there, and they heard there was some good trout fishing on the mouth of Eagle Lake. So they paddled out to this place called Smith Brook. And they set up camp there. And they set up camp, and they wanted to go night fishing, but it was getting dark. I guess, in retrospect, that's why they wanted to go fishing at night. It was getting dark, so there was no moon out that night. So they were like, okay, what we have to do is we have to set a gigantic fire. So no matter where we are on the lake, we can just point our canoe towards the fire and just pedal back, and we'll find it. It's like a lighthouse. It's like a beacon. So that's what they do. They pile this thing up, and they're like, they pile it up, and they start the fire, and they estimate that the fire will go for 3 hours. It'll be visible for about 3 hours. So they took one canoe out to do their night fishing. They started fishing. The seating, the load in was Foltz was up front. I guess the two Charleses, Foltz and Rack, were the more experienced canoers, because Foltz was up front. Then it was the two twins. It was Jack and Jim, and then Rack was in the back, which is fun to say. So they went out, and they were just doing some fishing. They said that the lake, Eagle Lake, was like black. It was like a sheet of black glass, and it was pretty impressive. And they said it was pretty quiet, like they couldn't hear no crickets or frogs or whatever out there. And then Rack, there's various different versions of what he said, but basically in one thing they're like, holy hell, what is that? In one documentary that I looked at, they were like, holy mackerel, look at that. So some kind of variation between that, like, what the fuck is that? I don't know. I don't know. They were art school kids. I mean, who knows? But it was rising from the trees was this huge light, and the light had a couple different things. It had a couple different features about it that I'm going to talk about. It hovered there above the trees. There was no sound. They said it was large in diameter. The one guy said it was like the length of a semi-truck trailer, but like in a sphere. So, we're talking like 30 feet around. They're talking about this thing is yellow and white light, super bright. And they said the surface, Jim always says this, the surface of the sphere was roiling, like it was in flux. So it's not like a solid light bulb. Like there was like some kind of like plasma action with it or something like this. So they were all super curious about it. So Foltz grabs his flashlight and he points his flashlight at this UFO, and he blinks out a Morse code thing. He's like SOS, like testing the thing to see what it's going to do. And in an instant, the thing started moving, and a beam of light zoomed towards the men in the canoe. In a feeble attempt to outrun this light, Jim says, Chuck, paddle faster. And so the two the canoe, the thing, fuck, you know what I'm talking about. The canoe has two oars. So the two Chucks have the oars, and the two brothers are like trying to paddle with their hands. So what they're saying is that they're freaking out about this thing now. So they're trying to outrun this beam of light and this UFO, and they're paddling for all it's worth. Then next thing they know, Foltz and Jack are standing on the beach, and Jim and Rack are getting out of the canoe. The sphere is hovering over the lake, like it was watching them. Fultz, again, flashlights this sphere, and the weird light took off in a matter of seconds. And the way it took off is weird. Like the beam went like retracted into the bottom of the thing, and it shot up instead. And they say it would go like, it would ascend, and then it would wink out. And then it would come back into view, but it would be like way higher and way further up apart, and it would wink out again. And the way the boys explain it is that it looked kind of like it was walking up the stairs, and like the beam would be pointed in the way that it was like going. So it's like a weird kind of thing. It's like a weird optical thing. So the guys all turned around, and they sat around for a second, and they were like, yeah, we're just going to go to bed. And Fultz was like, hey, should I put some more firewood on the fire? It's gone out. And they're like, no, we're just going to go to bed. And it seems like no one gave a shit that the fire just went out. Like, they were on the water for like 20 or 30 minutes. And this giant beacon, you know, they had a run-in with this UFO, and now their 3-hour-long beacon is burnt out. So they camped out the rest of their days there. And they said that they would go and talk to the different rangers, and they made like a formal report. Like, we saw this UFO, and everyone was like, yeah, all right, boy, you got a UFO. And they're like, you art school kids out here in the woods, probably smoking up on that pot. I don't and so they returned to Boston with their awesome UFO sighting story. The end. I'm just kidding. We're just getting started, bitches. All right. So after the Alagash, all these four artistic guys changed. Fultz, who was a photography guy, he started using unorthodox lighting for his photography, and he also became real interested in medical illustrations. So in the illustration world, if you were to look at like any kind of textbook like a doctor would have, or you know, like how they have those pamphlets or like they have the pictures of like the little skeleton guys with like lightning bolts in their like where their sciatica is acting up or whatever. There's guys that do these hyper realistic medical drawings for these publications. So he got into doing that. He actually got into doing that. He actually made a living out of it, actually, by the way. Jim started using weird processes. He was a sculptor, so he started using weird processes and different chemical glazes of his own design in his sculpting. And he also became obsessed. This is really weird. He also became obsessed with megalithic sites like Pumapuku and Telecon, Shaka Khan. And he had this idea that he would play around with for a long time, where these sites were actually like processors. They were actually macro chips rather than microchips, and they had like some kind of weird way that they would link into the world grid or like these ley lines or whatever. So I thought that was interesting. The other twin brother, Jack, was a painter. And instead of painting, he painted like still lifes and landscaping. He was like a real like a fine arts kind of painter. And so he started putting that stuff down, and he started doing collages with using mathematical principles. So there was like also like a grid line kind of thing to his new sort of obsession thing. So like, yeah, he would like use like 3-dimensional like pieces of paper to build like these 3-dimensional shapes expressing the principles of geometry. Chuck Rack, this is the only guy that's not real. He's not real vocal about this stuff. I don't know if he doesn't buy into it or whatever, but it's kind of a mystery. But they do say that his stuff changed somehow too, and they also said that he was the best out of all of them, at least at the time of the Alagash incident. And they also like threw around words like he was arrogant and pretentious, and he didn't like being in charge. That's why he doesn't talk about the abductions. So Jim's nightmares. They had a lot of like sleep paralysis stuff going on, where he could see like he was surrounded by shadowy figures, and they were like maneuvering or manipulating his body around. He couldn't control it or whatever. And Jim, actually, this is the guy with the brain damage, and he was the one that was given a pile driver. He started down this path of paranoia. Now, I don't want to laugh at that. That's bad. But like, he would double check his windows at night when he was going to bed. He'd padlock himself into his room. And in '88, so this is well over a decade after the Alagash incident, Jim was getting EEG work done for his epilepsy, and his EEG would spike during his dream/nightmare time. His psychiatrist, for his case or whatever at the hospital, realized he was displaying symptoms of abduction phenomenon, and he talked to him. He talked Jim into seeing the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist happened to be a head researcher for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Investigation Network, or something like that. Just Mutual UFO Network, I guess. He's like one of their lead investigators. His name is Ray Fowler. He not only is he a psychiatrist, but he is also, he chases these UFOs around. So Jim called his brother Jack, and they started talking about these nightmares, and it turned out that Jack was also having these same kind of dreams that Jim was having. So Jim and Jack got a hold of Ray, and they got all the boys were involved. So they filled out a MUFON report, like a viewing report on the Alagash incident. This guy, while he was researching this thing, he contacted the park rangers that the boys were in touch with during the time of the incident, and they also contacted all the other people that they've told this story to, seeing if it changed or if there was any funny business going on with these guys. Then he made these guys agree to do, well, he didn't make them agree, but he talked them into doing hypnotic regression independent from each other. So they weren't allowed to talk to each other, supposedly. They weren't allowed to talk to each other about what they were remembering in their regressions or whatever. They did polygraph tests. It was like the whole 9 yards, and supposedly each dude gave almost the same story besides distinct POVs and some time details. And like Foltz will say that his timeline is fractured with his remembering, because he remembers only just snippets. And another challenge that they had is Jim, because of his epilepsy, if he was too far under hypnosis, or if he was under hypnosis for too long, or if he started getting stressed out when he was in hypnosis, they were afraid that he would seize. So they had to bring him back out and then let him calm down and put him back under. So he even recognizes that they probably didn't get all out of him as they could have. So the last thing that they did is they're like, look, you guys are all artists in some vein or view. Like, why don't you guys sit down apart from each other and sketch out some of the parts of your story that you remember? And they would get them all together, and they would jibe with each other. and each dude did their own drawing. So they all were, in some ways, they were all corroborating evidence. I don't know if that's the right word. I mean, I only watched like 12 hours of Law and Order a week, so I'm not I'm not an attorney. I just play one on a podcast. You know what I'm saying? So there we are. So we're going to kind of go back to the beginning after this. We're going to go back to 1976, the Alagash in Maine. All right, so we're going to rewind just a little bit. Fulch just Morse coded the UFO with his flashlight while they were on a canoe on Eagle Lake. The beam came down from the UFO. It was a hollow tube beam of light. The boys started trying to escape, paddle faster, and the twins were using their arm flippers, trying to escape. The UFO was moving slowly, but now it was moving very fast. The canoe was now overtaken by the otherworldly beam of light. Jim started floating up towards the UFO. He remembers looking down and noticing Rack's seat was empty. While he was ascending into the air, he scanned the calm, black, glassy water, thinking that his friend might have fallen in and he might be drowning. While within the light tube tractor beam, Jim didn't feel heat, but he did feel like he would explode, or his body would explode from the internal pressure, and he wound up losing consciousness or like blanking out. When he regained consciousness, it was in a weird room made out of light. Their vision was limited. Not sure how. It's like when you smear Vaseline on a camera, is what he said. A camera lens is what he said. Some weird sort of tunnel vision. Jim was trying to focus on the figures that he sees, and he realizes he's looking at his twin brother Jack, who has taken all of his clothes off. Other 3 or 4 figures came out and surrounded Jack. And they started like bending and swiveling his arms, trying to figure out how his joints and his kung fu grip worked. These figures were small, skinny, and they were in little spandex uniforms. Their faces looked like bugs or ant faces. They had big eyes, tiny or no nose, mouth was low in like the chin area. And another thing that they all sort of agree on is that they have these 4 fingers, and each finger was opposing, and in the middle of their hand they had like these 4 nubs that can also oppose. It's weird. They have, if you guys Google it, like they have the one guy, Jack, did some really cool drawings about the hand, and you'll get it more by just looking at the picture for a second than you would get it from me trying to babble through this description of this hand. One of the aliens had a probe wand, and he was poking Jack at his neck and his spine. And they take Jack away, and then they go get Jim. There's a feeling of detachment, compliant, on the outside, but totally terrified and freaking out on the inside. I actually relate to this. When I got out of the Army, I dabbled in the Mary Jane a little bit, and by a little bit, I mean I smoked as much of it as I could all fucking day. I remember going to a party once and getting smoked up. I remember just sitting in this, it seems like in the middle of this living room. I was sitting in this big chair, like this big, like fluffy chair. And I was so high, I couldn't move, but I was totally aware of everyone around me pointing and laughing at me. And I just couldn't go. I couldn't do anything but just crawl inside myself and hope that I didn't start drooling or something. So that's what I think these guys were going through. Something like that. All right, they didn't use language, but when they were like telepathically communicating with the boys, they would just give you like an abstract concept. Like, you know, I understood that I had to comply. So they stripped Jim down and they put him naked on a table surrounded by ant aliens. And at first they were just checking his teeth, his nails, you know, just kind of like an under the hood sort of checkup. And then they started messing around with his genitalia. And Jim was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to get in the mood with ant aliens touching my genitalia while I'm brainwashed naked on a spaceship made out of light in the middle of the Maine woods. So somehow these ant aliens flooded Jim's mind with sexual imagery, and then they produced some sort of device that would fit over his dick and milk him, I guess. So Jim busted a nut, and the ant aliens got their sperm sample. Then they went ahead and they took other tissue samples from him. I guess like skin scrapings and swabs and this kind of stuff. You know how like these alien guys, these UFO guys will be like, well, you know, we back engineered stealth technology from the spacecraft that we have in Area 51. Or like that's where we got the microchip, or like the iPhones were back engineered from UFOs. Like, what if really the only technology that we could get from UFO is like like we back engineered the fleshlight. Back engineered the fleshlight from the down aircraft that we're holding in Area 51. It was originally so the Greys could get our sperm samples, but now, you know what I'm saying. So Jim was trying to devise a plan to escape. And this is what I always think that I would do. Like, if I got abducted, I would be like, I'm not taking any of this brainwashing shit. I'm going to break one of your little ant necks. Which is what Jim decided he was going to do. He thought he could grab an ant alien and Steven Seagal its neck, maybe causing a distraction so he could escape. But as soon as he thought this, all the little ant aliens jumped away from him, and then they got these hockey pucks that they put on his legs, and then he couldn't move anymore. According to Jim Weiner, hair had never grown back on his legs where these hockey pucks were. And then this is also the exact same area where his twin brother Jack got tumors on his legs in the exact same spot. So it's freaky if you buy it. Okay, so we're going to jump to Foltz's point of view, where Foltz couldn't see far or clearly. He describes it as like when you get your pupils medically dilated. He said that he was laying on a table and he lifted his head up and he realized that he was like, hey man, where are my socks? And then he was like, wait, where are my shoes? And then he was like, where's my clothes? So I guess he tells the story like this to explain like how far out of his head that he was. He was only focusing on small things at first. But eventually he gets to the where am I, and he looks around and he sees he's in this room made of light surrounded by, well, I don't know who he's surrounded by just yet, but he notices the other boys are just sitting against the wall naked, like they're waiting for a bus. Now he's surrounded by, this is such a funny idea. They're just sitting there playing on their iPhones, fucking twiddling their thumbs, just like they're just waiting for their turn to be on the table. They're surrounded by aliens. He remembers them more like Greys than like ant head aliens. They put some sort of vice across his chest, And he remembers standing, looking out of a porthole, observing the empty canoe floating in the black glassy water. And he could still see their giant campfire at this time in the distance. They did some experiments with these guys where they'd lock them in a room and they would like shoot vibrations at them, like sound, like sonic reverberation tests or something. It reminds me of that fucking gum commercial where they do that, where it's like boom, boom. They put the gum or whatever on a gigantic speaker and then you have to like dive into something. Is that a thing? Did I just make that up? I don't know. It feels like that's a thing. So after all the cum was sucked out of these poor guys, and all their arms were bent and twisted, these aliens put the boys' clothes back on, and they try to put him back in the canoe. They put Rack in the back where he was. Then they put Jim in next. They had a hard time getting Jack into the boat. I just have this funny thing in my head. So they decided to put the other two guys on the beach and just put the canoe on the beach. So they stack Foltz and Jack. They stand them there on the beach. They left the other two guys in the boat. Foltz grabbed his flashlight and signaled the UFO, which took off into the night sky. So that wraps up our coverage of the Alagash incident. And I've always been, like I said, drawn into stories like this, and just the idea of being helpless with weird aliens poking at you and jerking you off freaks me out. I don't know why. It seems logical to me that you don't want that to happen. So if you guys are like, well, this was a great episode, but what do I listen to next? Please go to society-13.com. You can check out other great podcasts like The Lift, Kettle Whistle Radio, The Wicked Library, The Pop-Off with Martise, Queens of NC-17, Prog Watch with the Prog Squatch, and my other monthly podcast, Red Horse Radio, with horror writer Nelson W. Pyles and comedian Tempting Melanie. You go to the Facebook page. I try to post some source videos and fun videos and stuff dealing with the topic of the week. So go there, like that. StigmataStudios.com for a list of comics I have available and anything else that I have going on. Stigmata Studios Instagram, Stigmata Studios Facebook, Johnny X, JONNYAXX on Twitter, or Stigmata Studios on Twitter will do just fine as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you like the story. And it's really fascinating that after this incident, and before they did their remembering, this incident changed their lives. And especially in like the ways that they do their artwork. I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of the story. All right. I got my quote here. I got everything ready to go. And I think we're going to call this one done. I'm going to go...
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm come face-to-face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
I'm going to go watch some Sense8 Season 2, I think. Maybe some Mystery Science Theater, The Return. The Moon. Chicka chicka bow. Doop doop